Cenk Uygur, we watched a segment yesterday that kind of had me kind of taken aback. Because Cenk Uygur came out and said that he was considering voting for RFK Jr. because of Israel, which he didn't like Biden's position on Israel, and corruption. And what baffled me about that is, number one, RFK is a hawk on Israel. If you say you're voting for RFK because you disagree with Biden on Israel, because that the position should be, if that's your take, I'm supporting RFK because Biden isn't supportive enough of Israel. Because RFK is very, very, very supportive of Israel. In fact, I would go as far to say that RFK is a hawk on Israel. And a lot of alt media type progressive or non-progressive commentators, because RFK has mostly been making his circles in the right-wing media space, have been kind of surprised to find that he's rabidly supportive of Israel. And when it comes to corruption, if anybody's going to tell me if that schmuck actually somehow ended up in the White House, then he wouldn't immediately indulge himself in the most obvious corruption imaginable, then you have a weird trust in a man for no reason. Why trust a man that is a serial liar? We've covered his segments on the show before. I remember checking out one of his ads, and we counted 12 lies. And I'm saying 12 lies. Back to back to back to back to back to back. This is not somebody you should trust with your, this is not somebody you should trust with like a local McDonald's, let alone the whole country. And so hearing these two reasons from him as to why he would support RFK Jr., to me was absolutely bizarre. Definitely when RFK Jr.'s party state chairs for his campaign are coming out and deliberately saying that, hey, what I would like to see happen is RFK takes enough votes away from Biden to make an electoral toss-up. And so it's not dependent upon who wins the most votes. And it's not even dependent upon who wins the most electoral college votes. It's dependent upon sending it back to the state governments, which are largely controlled by Republicans, therefore possibly handing an election that otherwise wouldn't be won by Donald Trump to Donald Trump, circumventing the voters. That is concerning to me, especially since another reason why Cenk Uygur said he wasn't in favor of Joe Biden was because they didn't have the party primary, which, by the way, an incumbent not really having a party primary is nothing new at all. I mean, that doesn't mean it hasn't been changed. It doesn't mean you might not like it. I don't really like it, to be honest, but that's nothing new. And if somebody was to tell me that the RFK Jr. campaign wouldn't try to use semi-undemocratic tactics to try to win an election, as we're hearing the state chairs say they want to, at least they are interested in subverting the results of the election. And she openly said that she talked to RFK about it. Hey, RFK, would you be comfortable with me coming out and saying this? And he said yes. He said yes. That's why she said it publicly. I didn't think any of the logic that Cenk Uygur put forward made sense for why he would be considering RFK over Joe Biden, definitely considering this election. Now, if he was to say, I live in California, explicitly say, I live in California, I have a special right almost, or a special privilege living in a state that is hard blue, that it doesn't really matter how I vote. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to write in Santa Claus because he's the only real pacifist candidate. That I would respect more than this. I don't know if it's a contrarian take or just an edgy take or where it's coming from. I'd respect that a lot more. And it would also allow you to differentiate between living in a swing state that could have a real impact on who's going to be the next president of the United States, what's going to be the makeup of the Supreme Court moving forward. And anybody telling me that's not important after the overturn of Roe versus Wade is a schmuck and is not paying attention. Like, these distinctions were not made. And I wanted to see how he's going to do in a conversation talking about this topic and others when he has other people in the room to push back on him and not just Anna Kasparian to the side of him going, And that's why David Pakman and Brian Taylor Cohen have been invited on with Cenk Uygur onto the Don Lemon Show, which is his new show online after, that fiasco at CNN. And I wanted to check it out with you guys. So let's get to it. Let's start with, let's do a little bit of the abortion segment, and then we skip through it if it's not that important.
The right wing in this election.
It has that potential. I think it's a little.
So the question was, is the abortion the issue that sinks the right wing in this election? That was a question.
early, and you know, we can make grand predictions, but I think it's hard to say that it will be the issue. But this really is potentially a problem. It's all completely predictable. I mean, you go back to the end of 2015, lots of folks, without patting anybody on the back necessarily, were saying the path here is, if Trump wins, he gets 2 or 3 Supreme Court justices at the first opportunity. They will overturn Roe v. Wade. Antiquated.
Wait, let me pat a few. Can I pat one person on the back in particular? Sam Cedar. Go back and watch Sam Cedar's debate with Jimmy Dore on the issue of the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, which Jimmy Dore said was impossible. He said it was impossible. He said it was more likely that the moon went into Lake Michigan. That moment, and not even that moment alone, but that moment should have discredited that man from any future political commentary, period. If you say that something's impossible and then it happens, you need to reassess whether that is a voice in media you should be listening to. I mean, let me put it this way. If CNN made that type of mistake, would Jimmy Dore give them the benefit of the doubt? I don't think so.
Laws that are still on the books in many states will then all of a sudden be at the forefront, and next thing you know, you have laws. You know, we said 1964, many of us were thinking this is an 1864 law. Next thing you know, those are the laws people have to contend with. And it's leaving the evangelical right furious. Mike Pence putting out this very critical tweet the other day. It's also leaving folks who are in the majority, who think abortion should be legal in most cases, angry. So it has the potential to be a real problem.
Well, the thing is, as you said, you know, you can't really be half in and half out. I mean, you can't, you know, this sort of leave it up to the states. You can't really be half in and half out when it comes to abortion.
I mean, listen, you can claim to be, but the problem is that there's the majority of the country now actually doesn't really want that. They're in theory open to states' rights until what states want are no longer, unless it's no longer convenient to them. And we're seeing that happen with a lot of folks on the MAGA side. And I think that this has the potential to backfire. Now, there's going to be so many other issues. I know Cenk and Brian will talk about some of them. So I'm not ready to say this is going to be the defining issue in November, but it seems to be important.
And jump in.
It all depends, because Donald Trump himself is trying to course correct. He put out a Truth Social post saying, look, I believe that there should be exceptions for things like rape and incest. And he said that because he knows that basically everyone in the United States believes that there should be an exception in abortion for rape and incest. And there's only a small group of ideological radicals that think otherwise. And while this is not serving those ideological radicals, he understands that if Donald Trump, if he is going to win re-election, it's going to not be by making those ideological radicals just love him that little bit more. It's going to be by winning over independents and getting back suburbia, which he lost in 2020, but was able to get enough of in 2016 to beat Hillary, but lost in 2020 to Joe. And this type of position on abortion is not how you win back suburbia, because suburbia does not think that IFV should go away. Suburbia does not think that rape and incest should be something that, okay, well, this 14-year-old girl was raped by her brother. She has to carry the baby to term now. Like, nobody believes this, but only the ideological diehards that were always going to vote for the Republican anyway. And he understands it. And when you listen to his post, though, and this is something I respect about Trump, is that in some instances, he's the most dishonest man in the world, but in other instances, he's more honest than any politician. And it's hard for me to describe how. So I think this is a great example of how it is. Well, Trump will lie about a lot of things: his golf swing, hurricane patterns, tons and tons and tons of criminal activity. One thing he was honest about is the motivations behind why he was doing this, where he explicitly said, if we lose this election, this is going to be bad for us. He said a lot of things. He said it would lead to death, destruction, yada, yada, yada. But basically, he pitched it like this. We need to make exceptions for this. If we do not, that could very much make us lose the election. We do not want to lose the election. He didn't try to make some strong ideological, like, okay, this is why life actually doesn't begin at conception if it's rape. Actually, this is why life doesn't actually begin at conception if it's your brother. That he didn't make that argument because that argument wouldn't make sense. If life begins at conception, then life begins at conception. You can't make any ifs, ands, and buts about it. Now, I would make a distinction between the life of 2 cells and the life of a fully grown person who can think, breathe, and can comprehend the universe around them. That's the difference between a blade of grass and, you know, something that has consciousness. But that distinction doesn't matter to a lot of evangelicals. And that's not a distinction that I think Donald Trump particularly cares about either. And if he did care about the distinction, that would not only apply to rape and incest, though, that would apply to other instances as well, which could even piss them off further. So he's just sticking to the most ugly exceptions, rape and incest. But it's purely electorally motivated. But if you truly believe, and you got to look through the perspective of the people who believe that, you know, abortion is murder in all circumstances. If you truly believe that abortion is murdering a baby, then it's not that surprising that they're going to give some backlash, because if your political leader is saying we should murder babies sometime, yeah, that's going to give you a bad, that's going to give you, you're going to be revulsed. You're going to be repulsed by that. So yeah, it makes sense that they're not happy with it. But I mean, it might not be an ideologically consistent position from Trump, but it certainly is at least a more electable position from Trump. And he's open about that. And that's his motivation.
Anytime, guys, if you feel passionate about it. But Brian, I want to ask you, do you think that this is going to be a deciding issue, or maybe one deciding issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the issue. To David's point, in terms of being able to straddle both sides, I think Donald Trump tried to do that, and it blew up in his face pretty badly, because on Monday he came out and said that he supports states' rights, and you know, the veracity of that claim we can get into in a moment, because he doesn't. But regardless, he said it. He said he supports states' rights. And then what happened on Tuesday? The very next day, within 24 hours, a state came out and said that we're upholding an abortion ban from 1864. And so by virtue of saying that he supports states' rights, he now owns.
Mind you, though, while the court decided that they do have the right to enforce that law, which was made before Arizona was even a state, by the way. I think it was still a territory in 1864, in the middle of the Civil War, or towards the end of the Civil War. The Attorney General of Arizona said that they would not enforce it, which, of course, got a huge sigh of relief from Arizonan people. But mind you, that election that elected that Arizona Attorney General was decided by 300 votes. Out of hundreds and thousands. So if somebody tells you your vote doesn't matter, well, it does.
Owns the issue that happened within 24 hours of him saying that. So there is no way to be able to straddle this issue, because when you claim that you want states' rights in an attempt to make yourself seem more moderate, what the states are actually doing completely undermines that, and it does it immediately.
But Cenk, he did say today, he was in Atlanta and he was getting off a plane, either getting off or getting on a plane, and he said to a reporter, I'm going to speak to the governor and we're going to fix that, take care of it immediately.
So, look, he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. And he's now become a standard greasy politician. Oh, I'm so proud that I overturned Roe v. Wade. And at the same time, I don't mean it. I don't mean it. Yeah, women can have any rights they want as long as I get elected and I get rich and I get famous and all these things. So which one is it, Donald? You greasy politician. So he's so...
That does need to be pointed out more, that Donald Trump has finished his transformation into a greasy politician. That Donald Trump, as the anti-establishment candidate, he might not be the friend of a certain establishment you might not like, which might be the Democratic establishment, some type of liberal establishment, the liberal Democratic establishment, which I think is good to have established, at least in the United States, over non-liberal anti-democracy movements. He might be fighting against some version of the establishment, but he has his own establishment. For example, Biden had a big fundraiser. I think it had 1,000 people, and he raised $25 million. Might have even had more people. And the donations varied from like $300 to like $25,000 or something in that range. Trump then a little bit later announces braggadociously that he had a fundraiser of 100 people for $50 million. Now, if that's true or not, if it's BS, I don't know. But if you're trying to portray yourself as the populist man of the people, raising $50 million from 100 people, you don't think some favors were being bought? For example, when Trump turned against the TikTok ban, which is something that him and his movement have been pushing for a while, it was not because of some big ideological shift or Trump was like, I have found the way of TikTok. I am now going to be engaged in a TikTok trend. And then Trump went and like opened an ice cream packet and licked the top, put it back in the freezer. No, that's not what happened. Trump had a meeting with somebody who's financially involved with TikTok right before he came out with the announcement, hey, guys, I just had this meeting. It looks like, actually, we shouldn't ban the TikTok, huh? And that person just so happened to be financing his campaign. greasy politician behavior. It's the type of stuff that you would expect from a greasy politician. That Molotov cocktail anti-establishment chic just doesn't exist with Donald Trump anymore if you're paying attention and you're looking at the details. If it ever existed in the first place, which I don't think it did.
And the Republicans' hypocrisy is obvious, as it is every single time. Lindsey Graham all of a sudden saying this is a moral issue that has nothing to do with geography. So let me get this right. When conservatives in this country were defending states' rights during slavery...
Look, I'm just going to throw out there, Lindsey Graham's position is at least more morally consistent than Donald Trump's, even if it is more repulsive.
Slavery and Jim Crow for 100 years. That was not a moral issue, or that was a moral issue. That was totally fine to be decided by geography. But all of a sudden, we're not talking about states' rights because he wants to make abortion illegal everywhere. Lindsey Graham does. And so Donald Trump, make up your mind. In the case of Arizona...
To be clear, it's more consistent on the issue of abortion, not the issue of like states' rights or states deciding these different policies.
Real quick, look, the court...
Because Lindsey Graham wants a national abortion ban. And when he announced he was going for it, like a lot of his colleagues looked at him like he was like, what are you doing, man? The political winds are not there for this, not during this election. It's already going to be a rough spot. What are you doing?
Decision is what it is. When you overturn Roe v. Wade, things like this happen. Old laws kick into place. I don't have much of an issue with that legally. Policy-wise, it's a disaster for the women of Arizona. And then in terms of politics, Joe Biden has never had a better gift. This puts Arizona back into play. Right. Now Biden has a pretty great chance of winning Arizona.
And for people like Carrie Lake, it's a disaster. For anybody who's on the ticket in Arizona as a Republican, I think it would be a disaster.
She came out against it, actually.
I would add, not just Arizona either. I mean, this is going to
even though there's previous audio of her endorsing abortion bans.
Be on the ballot in Montana. This is going to be on the ballot in Florida. This is going to be on the ballot in New York, where these congressional races have major implications.
By the way, I might be going out to Montana to try to help that ballot initiative. I don't know yet. I'm still trying to figure it out, but keep an eye out for that.
Implications for the House in 2024. So, you know, they've really, I mean, stepped in it here as badly as they can.
Yeah. Cenk, I want to pivot to something else. Some of the comments that you have made in recent days.
Here we go.
Incredibly critical of President Joe Biden here. In recent days, you have even gone as far to suggest that you would vote for RFK Jr. instead of Biden. Really?
Yeah, I'm considering it. I don't know why people get so outraged by this. And I know part of it is that it's a binary world. So when you say you're dissatisfied with Joe Biden, people go, oh, so you love Donald Trump? No, I hate Donald Trump. I don't know that anybody hates Donald Trump more than I do. Having said that, that doesn't mean that Joe Biden doesn't have an awful, immoral, genocide-supporting policy in Gaza. And I'm disgusted by it, and any decent person should be disgusted by it. So what am I supposed to say? Like, oh, Joe Biden's so great. No, I don't do propaganda. Joe Biden sucks, and his corruption is the same as all of the establishment Democrats and establishment Republicans. They take hundreds of millions, actually in the case of Biden, billions of dollars in corporate campaign contributions and pretend that the contributions don't matter to them. So I'm not ever going to grab pom-poms and cheerlead for Joe Biden. Now, in terms of RFK Jr., I'm not saying I'm going to vote for him. I'm saying I have begun to consider it. He's crazy on vaccines.
Again, he's worse on the issue of Israel. And of course, Trump is definitely worse on the issue of Israel. Like, he would not be any better on the issue of corruption in any manner. And on issues like public health, he would be a million times worse as an open anti-vaxxer. This is a terrible idea. He hasn't thought this through, not to even talk about the fact that RFK Jr. doesn't have a chance, and his state directors are talking about using his campaign as a tool to get Trump in the White House, to try to subvert the process. He's not thinking this through, man. He's not thinking this through. This almost feels like headline grabbing more than anything. Like, he knows that, like, Cenk says RFK would, like, you know, be like, what? And get people to pay attention. Like, what's the purpose of this?
And conspiracy theories, etc. At the same time, he doesn't come in with a giant amount of corruption baggage like Biden and Trump do. So that's just reality. And then where does that leave me? I don't know. I'm going to see how the campaign plays out.
You have said that Joe Biden has been, quote, corrupt his whole life. I mean, what evidence do you have that Joe Biden is corrupt?
100% corrupt. I have overwhelming evidence. But I don't want people to think that I'm picking on Joe Biden as he's the only politician who's corrupt or that he's personally corrupt. I'm talking about systemic corruption. The problem with Donald Trump is he's personally corrupt and he can't wait to take money from Saudi Arabia and all these other places. We get that. We all understand that, right? But when it comes to Biden, people in mainstream media and the Democratic Party make what I view to be a totally insane statement, which is, no, he might have taken $1 billion from corporate contributions, but he doesn't owe them any favors. And he doesn't let those donors affect them at all. Look, that's just nuts. So here, I'll give you an example of the thing that I'm most animated about these days, which is Gaza. He's taken $11.2 million from AIPAC. I mean, I'm curious what you guys think, but I think it's mental to think that he doesn't.
Before I move on, I understand that. Listen.
By the way, my official position is that he shouldn't be taking that money from AIPAC. I don't believe any money that people should be taking money from groups like that. I agree with that on principle. But the idea that because I'm not happy with the way that Biden is financing his campaign, I'm going to default to the option that doesn't have a chance of winning, that's also worse. It's just the logic does not play out, especially when you're doing it as an online commentator. If he said personally, I don't want to vote for Joe Biden because he's so awful. I'm in California. I'm going to go write in Santa Claus. I can understand that. I'm from Maryland. If I wanted to write in Santa Claus, I could write in Santa Claus, right? But if you're talking to your audience who live in Pennsylvania, who live in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, who live in Florida, who live in North Carolina, who live in Georgia, who live in Nevada, who live in Arizona, who live in New Hampshire, who live in states that electorally can decide traditionally the outcome of the race, you should not be sending signals to them that they should be going for options that don't have a chance in hell. You should not. I don't look at voting as choosing my best friend. I don't look at, if I was doing that, okay, I would not be voting. I wouldn't have gone and canvassed for Bernie Sanders either, because I don't think me and Bernie would actually have a great time going out to the club and partying, or like, I'm not even looking for somebody who necessarily agrees with me on every issue. I still canvass for Bernie because he's the one who agreed with me most on the issues that I cared about. I'm looking for the best possible path forward of those available as we continue to build upon the successes that we've had in the future and try to prevent this country from derailing. And I think a lot of people do not appreciate how little it could take in some instances, given a perfect storm of disasters, to derail the republic and send it into a tailspin. We see in Myanmar what happens when democracies are sent into a tailspin. We've seen countries tear itself apart in Sudan, in Syria. We've seen the results of this. I have no interest in pussyfooting around this when we have somebody running for office who is quite open about the fact that he has no respect for our democratic institutions. He's perfectly willing to subvert them. He's perfectly willing to commit crimes to attempt to subvert them, get fake electors, try to intimidate Secretary of States in his own party and punish them for not trying to throw out the election and get him votes that he doesn't have. And we'll watch as his supporters storm the Capitol and sit there for hours and do nothing to stop them, as they're chanting for the hanging of the Vice President of the United States, who you wanted to take unconstitutional power to overturn the results of the election, to have state legislatures decide the result outside of the American people. That's undemocratic, and he was setting it up forever. He said if he lost before the election, if he lost, it was rigged. Do you think he's going to treat this election any different? Do you think if given the opportunity to grab total power that man wouldn't? We should not put this man an inch within the White House. I mean, he shouldn't be an inch within any type of power institution. He should be a fucking dog catcher, let alone president of the United States. And this is something I've taken from my short time on this earth and from the little bit of history that I've been able to take in from my time reading books and trying to be a little nerd, is that when there is an ascendant authoritarian right-wing threat, the last thing the left should do is squibble and squabble and fight each other when they should be uniting, trying to pave over as many differences as they can for the general election fight. It is not smart for the left to divide itself when faced with this type of threat. It isn't. It isn't smart. It's a losing strategy for the left. It's a losing strategy for the country. It's a losing strategy for the republic. I'm not saying
I get it.
I'm not saying paving over those differences forever. You don't. You don't even completely pave them over. You can still acknowledge them. I want the president to be more aggressive when it comes to marijuana legalization. I want the president to be more aggressive when it comes to the public option, even going further than that. I want the president to be more aggressive when it comes to a ton of issues. But we cannot pretend that we live in different circumstances and that there's actually a chance of putting somebody else in the White House outside of Joe Biden and Donald Trump unless one of them croaks in the next few months.
Upset about Gaza. That is understandable. A lot of people are upset, and a lot of people have questions about policy as it relates to Israel and what's going on with Gaza. But to say that Joe Biden is corrupt, maybe he's taking advantage of a system that's already in play. But again, I'll ask you, what evidence do you have that Joe Biden is corrupt?
Don, look, this is the thing that I'm confused by you guys on. And so Joe Biden here, let's talk about one issue, but it applies to drug companies.
So this is the thing. What Don Lemon is asking for is a more traditional, like, corruption that was actually criminal in the United States. He's asking for Bob Menendez style corruption. He was he still is actually an American senator, even though he's going through a ton of criminal allegations right now because he took gold bars from Egyptian agents to do their bidding and then praise the Egyptian government. I think the dude should resign in disgrace. It is disgusting that the dude is still in there. I think it's right for us to try to kick him out of the party, we should kick him out of the Senate. Point is, though, that is more traditional style corruption that Don Lemon wants from Cenk. But what Cenk is saying is that he is benefiting off of an already normalized form of political corruption that is big corporate donors contributing to campaigns, and then the campaigns advertise. And then once those people are in power, they will then serve the interests of said corporations by, like, for example, if it's an oil and gas company, maybe giving them some government contracts, or maybe if it was some group around guns or group around, I don't know, electric cars, maybe they're going to do some new legislation for them on electric cars. He's talking about that style of corruption, or what he's calling corruption, even if it's called legalistically in the United States corruption. It is certainly, I would say, a perverse incentive, if you don't want to use the word corruption.
Oil companies, banks, every kind of corporate contribution. But in the case of Gaza, that's a good example. AIPAC has given him $11.2 million over the course of his career. He's the number one recipient of AIPAC money in United States Senate history. So my proposition, which I would, if you did a poll on it, my guess is 95% of Americans would agree, is that does that $11 million affect Joe Biden's unilateral, unconditional support of Israel throughout his entire career and today? 95% of Americans would agree with me. Of course it affects his decisions. But yet all of mainstream media treats it as like corruption. How dare you? He's an angel who would never be affected by $11 million.
Well, that's not what I'm saying, Cenk. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not saying that.
Could I jump in for a second?
Go ahead, Brian.
Cenk, you're a straight talker. You know RFK is not going to win. He doesn't have a chance to win. But you also know that every vote that's not going to Cenk, you know that RFK is not going to be the next president. I think we can all speak plainly here.
Why is he shaking his head? Why is he shaking his head? Does he think he has a chance? No, he's just fucking with him. He can't. No, come on, Cenk. Why is he shaking his head? He can't be disagreeing with the premise. Like that RFK has a chance. There must be something else he's disagreeing. He can't be disagreeing with the fact that RFK doesn't have a chance. RFK does not have a chance. If RFK could have any impact on the election, it is purely by taking the votes away from other people. Whether it be Trump or Biden is yet to be seen.
You're trafficking in straight denial if you're actually claiming by shaking your head that you think that RFK Jr. has a chance.
Well, I think just to if we're going to ask questions, I would say what are the 5 states he's most likely to have a shot in? Maybe we could start narrow.
Yeah, guys, look, here's the deal. I know the third-party candidates have a very, very low chance? Jill Stein, Cornel West, and every other election. Of course,
they have no chance.
I'm not a person who denies reality in any way, shape, or form. Having said that, this election is kind of like the Ross Perot election, where a third-party candidate actually has a legitimate chance because both of the candidates are despised. So if a Mark Cuban or a Jon Stewart were to come in, I think they win the whole damn thing.
No. Ross Perot didn't win. I mean, like, you can't say, oh, this is like a Ross Perot election. Oh, really? President Ross Perot. I was not familiar with that. Well, even if it was a Ross Perot election and RFK, an anti-vax loon who lies out of both sides of his mouth, and his own family's basically disowned him, is comparable to Ross Perot, I think that's insulting. Just because he's got the name Kennedy, but whatever. But even if that is the case, Ross Perot lost.
RFK Jr. is a pretty weak candidate, so he has a much lower chance. But even so, he's polling at 10, sometimes at 20%. So if you think that has no chance, I think you're wrong. Is it a high chance? No, of course not.
I have a couple. Oh, go ahead.
No, he has no chance. Like, people see the name Kennedy and they smile and they go, ooh. Now, having the name Kennedy will not be enough to deliver you to the White House. The 10 to 20% is because he has the name Kennedy. A few percentage point might be because they actually like the fact that he's against vaccines, stuff like that. But that is not a delivering message to the White House. As people learn more about him, they're not going to like him. They're not going to like him. He's not winning any states.
Right. Sorry.
The broader question. The broader question I want to ask is, like, knowing that this is like very likely not going to happen, you have more likelihood of being able to persuade, to push Joe Biden, especially on these issues that you're passionate about, than you would if Donald Trump became president, which would be the likely outcome by throwing support behind someone like RFK. You think Joe Biden is bad on Gaza? What do you think Donald Trump would do to Palestine, to Gaza, if he became the next president?
Hang on, Jake, before you answer.
And we're all saying this as if, like, from the luxury of a bunch of guys sitting here while abortion bans are being passed across the country.
Right.
We just talked about an 1864 abortion ban that was just upheld in Arizona. If Donald Trump becomes the next president, then forget Arizona. We're going to have nationwide abortion ban in California, New York, Vermont. I mean, we have the.
I mean, we don't know that for sure, but there certainly will be people trying to propose that.
Luxury of not having to.
Like, it would be very, very difficult. You need 60 votes unless Trump would be willing to get rid of the filibuster. And I gotta say, honestly, out of all the candidates that would be willing to do it, Trump's probably near the top of the list.
To worry about that in this conversation right here, but there are women across the country who will lose that luxury by virtue of, imposing purity tests on certain candidates.
That is true. That is true. But hang on, Jake. I want David to jump in because I want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, listen, on the RFK math, first of all, I mean, I've been seeing what some of his advisors have been saying. One of them's talking about how his path to victory goes through California. I've looked at the math in California. He'd have to take half of Biden's and 1/3 of Trump's support. I mean, I think that it is a mathematical impossibility. Cenk and I have talked about the math of this before on my show, and we may just disagree about what's likely versus what's probable. On the corruption thing, I actually agree with Cenk that every single person who has been president has both benefited from and accepted the status quo of campaign finance, the way politics is financed, super PACs, all of it. And also because we have a Republican Party that has spent years now wasting millions in taxpayer money looking for supposed criminal bribery that they still have no evidence of. James Comer is privately admitting in fundraising emails, we're not going to impeach the guy, it's just not going to work. I think it's important to be responsible and talk about how Cenk pointing out the corruption of the system is totally different than Joe Biden being guilty of any things they're personally accusing him of. And then lastly, and then I'll go back to this other stuff, I don't want to vote in a way that is, I'm a super simple and pragmatic guy. My vote in New York or Cenk and Brian's votes in California aren't actually going to, quote, matter in the sense that neither of those states will be close. Biden's going to win all of them. True. I actually think of the three options, Biden's the best option, so that's who I'm voting for, rather than calculating message sending or whatever. And on Gaza, if one is concerned about the prioritization of the Palestinian people, RFK would be worse based on everything I've heard him say about.
Thank you for somebody bringing it up, David. Thank you. RFK is so much worse on the issue of Gaza. And Donald Trump is a guy saying you should go after the families of terrorists. So if you have a problem with how the bombing campaign is going on in Gaza, I don't think Trump does at all. In fact, if anything, I wouldn't be surprised if he went in there and said, you're going too nice.
About the conflict. And Trump would be even worse. So
Trump's critique of the Israeli government was literally, I've read it recently, it was they're losing the PR war. It has nothing to do with civilian casualties, nothing to do with the World Central Kitchen aid workers getting killed, or the Orthodox Church that was bombed, or any of the other instances of lynching in West Bank or anything. No, it's just that, man, they're not selling it well.
Even on that, the best option's Biden.
And Cenk, David is right. When I said that he may be taking advantage of a system that's already in place, he articulated that much better than I did. What people think when you say Joe Biden is corrupt, that he's personally corrupt, right? Not that he's part of a system that you're pointing out the flaws in that system. But listen, I spoke with D.L. Hughley. He said something very similar to what David said, and we'll play the soundbite for you.
I had a dinner with him and told him and the vice president the same thing. And I said, but the problem is I don't live in Gaza. I live in the United States of America. And I'm not going to, as a protest vote, make my children's life harder. I'm not going to give my vote to somebody in a protest, from a protest perspective, that would empower people that only want to make my children's life. I can't think of one group of people who wants to give you guns and abortion to rid you of any diversity, equity, inclusion. It's just a lot of things. Like at one point in America, it was illegal for slaves to learn. Now in many places, it's illegal to learn about slaves. That's a mindset. And so there are a lot of things that bother me, but I think where I see people, where I have a clear kind of line of sight is where I think what'll be best for the future of my grandchildren.
What do you say to that?
So I have so many things to say here. First, let's start out with, we are not deciding who we're voting on today. If you guys have already decided and you say, okay, Joe Biden, we bow to you. We serve you. We will do whatever you want. I'm not in that.
Serve you.
Okay. So he's got to earn my vote.
Neither am I.
My support. And he has not done that at all. Okay. So that's point one. But yes, on election day, if Kennedy, RFK Jr. is still around 10 points, that means he has 0% chance of winning. It applies to Cornell, West, Stein, etc. Then I'm going to make a decision between Joe Biden and Donald.
Could you imagine, like, okay, here's my situation. Let's say it was Bernie Sanders or like any type of fucking anyone versus Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's like, I'm going to be dictator. Let's just like Donald Trump said he wanted to be dictator on day one. But let's just say he went further. And he just said, I want to be dictator. And I came out there and said, Joe Biden just ended support for Ukraine. I'm going to build a coalition to not participate. And we're not going to participate in swing states to send a message over Ukraine aid. Now, I might feel good about that. I might feel like really good about that. It might make me feel so much better about myself because I'm standing by my friends who are dying, right? I might feel better, but there is nothing that's going to come from that that's productive. There's nothing that's going to come from that that's going to help the people in Ukraine. There's nothing that's going to come from that that's going to change the situation. The only thing that's going to happen is I get almost like an emotional release. I use the ballot box as a stress toy. And that's not how I feel like using the ballot box. I don't think it's strategic. I think it would make me feel better if I wrote in, who am I voting for? Nestor Ivanovich Makhno. Like, oh man, I feel much better about myself. But I have to understand that, this is one factor that decides the vote, and this is one issue. There's a ton of issues on the table. And at the end of the day, Biden is much better than the other option, even if he has Jake Sullivan in the room holding him back. And even if he's been unable to go further with Ukraine aid, in part because of House controls on him, but also because of advisors holding him back. Like, it would not fix the situation with Ukraine. It would not help the Ukrainians. It would not help any of these other issues. It would basically just be the political equivalent of me throwing my hands in the air and saying, fuck it.
Donald Trump. And I'm never going to vote for Donald Trump. So there you go. Okay. But at this point, we're not anywhere near there yet. And we've got a third-party candidate that's in double digits. In terms of Joe Biden being able to be pushed, I haven't seen it. So on Israel and Gaza, he can't be pushed at all. No matter what we do, no matter how many, there's literally 1 million Palestinians starving to death. There's 33,000 dead already. And Joe Biden is saying, no, send them $14 billion more to do more genocide. That's not a little issue. That's a giant, giant moral issue. And I do not want to fund a genocide. So you're not going to move me off that position. But David is right.
I do want to say that Cenk Uygur is of the position. Now, let's say I just grant that it's a genocide in Gaza, right? Let me not get into terminology of the academic term. If I was to just grant him that it's a genocide in Gaza, I would have to ask on top of that, why does he oppose funding resistance against what would be a genocide in Ukraine? Because if the argument is that there's a genocide in Gaza over the idea that the Israeli government may remove, we don't know for sure, but they could plan due to certain far-right people in the party to remove the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, take over the land, as many people in the pro-Palestinian camp suspect, we know that the Russian government is taking homes from Ukrainians and giving them to settlers. We know that the Russian government has signed laws into law that makes it so that if you do not accept a Russian passport, your property is theirs. They can take it from you and they can give it to whoever the hell they want. As they're taking Ukrainian children, kidnapping them, illegally deporting them to Russia, and then sending them to nationalistic summer camps where they're telling them, you're not Ukrainian, you're a Russian. You're a Russian. What is that? That's cultural erasure. Some people might use the word cultural genocide or just the word genocide. A lot of Ukrainians do. If this is a genocide in the West Bank, this would also be a genocide. He is firmly against sending in any more military aid to the Ukrainians. That's what I've heard from Cenk. I think that's the position him and Anna have. And for me, if you're really this strong, we must fight against genocide, struggle against genocide, unless it comes with guns, because that's aesthetically unpleasing as a left-winger, because Raytheon might smile a bit. I don't know. Like, I respect the amount he cares about Gaza. I just would like to see that same outrage directed towards the issue that is not getting as many views as it used to.
That unfortunately all three candidates are awful on Gaza. They're all despicable.
I had the UN ambassador in the other day, and I questioned her about this genocide language, and she said she does not believe it's a genocide.
That's a lunatic position. I'm sorry, but look, if you know what the definition of genocide is, it is not the same as a Holocaust. So, by the way, Israel, what are you doing? For God's sake, what are you doing? Now you're bragging that it's not a Holocaust. So Holocaust is when you try to kill everybody in the race. Israel is not doing that, okay? Genocide is when you target based on a race and you kill at the levels that Israel is killing at now. Srebrenica was 6,000 Muslims that were killed by the Serbs, and the UN declared that a genocide. If Srebrenica is a genocide, there is absolutely no question at all that Gaza is a genocide, and it has all of the.
Is that not the goal of Hamas, is to wipe out the Jewish state? Is that not the goal of Hamas, to wipe out Israel?
Yeah. All of these are super tired talking points. So yes, but Israel is actually preventing a Palestinian state for 7.
Okay, in Srebrenica, to be clear, what happened is they gathered up all of the men, like everyone, and then they shot them. And that's what they did. They gathered up everyone and then they shot them. There was not a question of, is there a terrorist in this home? Oh, there's one terrorist, 20 guys, blow it up, boom. You could say that doesn't apply by the law of proportionality. You could even go far enough to say that's a war crime. They're not taking into consideration civilian casualties. But that is different than Srebrenica. They can both be brutal, they can both be horrible, but you don't need to pretend these two are the same things to be morally outraged by both.
75 long, brutal years of occupation. Israel has said, oh, theoretically the Palestinians don't want us to have a state, but you don't get a state. How is that fair? That doesn't make any sense at all. The minute they allow Palestine, look, both sides need to recognize the two states. The idea that Hamas has that Israel's not going to exist is also a very much a lunatic idea and a dangerous, terrible idea. I do not support that at all. I support protecting civilian lives on both sides. And right now, Israel, we've got to be honest about this. Israel has killed 30 times the number of civilians that Hamas did. So if you think Hamas is an awful organization, as I do, then you should be outraged by what Israel has done. Yet I don't see that. When it comes to Israel, no, okay, send them 14 billion more. No, honestly, at this point, the Israeli state is, I mean, I don't want to put it on the whole government. There's a lot of.
By the way, I'm in my head. I don't know why I'm really like specific about numbers, and I don't think the numbers are adding up. But I don't want to nitpick about the numbers because I feel like it'd sound like I'm downplaying. But I'm just gonna say I'm not gonna get into any of the number stuff right now. I just don't feel like it. I don't think it'd be worth it.
Great people in Israel, and I hope they turn around and they vote the right way. But this current government and the IDF, as it is currently composed, the leadership, are definitely meet the definition of terrorists. Netanyahu is one of the largest terrorists in the world right now.
Depending on you considering that a terrorist does not have to be a non-government actor, which is how a lot of people define terrorists. You don't have to agree with the definition. You could say it's morally flawed. You could say it's ethically flawed, but it depends on your definition of terrorist.
Hey, real quick, and I know, Brian, you want to
What
get
I understand is the ethics of the thing he's trying to get at.
in. On the issue of moving Biden, I kind of do see evidence that Biden can be moved and influenced. I mean, Biden's taken money from Big Pharma for a long time, and yet he did $35 insulin, inhalers, and on the 10 biggest Medicare drugs, now those companies are being forced to negotiate. On cannabis, quite frankly, I don't think Biden cares at all about decriminalizing or legalizing, and yet he's asked for the rescheduling of cannabis. And
he needs to move forward. I've said this before. It is now legal in the majority of the states. Most Americans live in states where pot is legal. Pot being legalized is overwhelmingly popular. Overwhelmingly popular. Biden has an issue with youth motivation to go out and vote right now. This is an issue that obviously is concerning youth voters, especially. And now, I just say, like, you go forward and just endorse it. Just endorse the policy of marijuana legalization. I think it'd be a smart political move. You should move forward. At the last State of the Union, he said that nobody should be in prison for possession. Nobody should be in prison for possession. There's one step forward from there. There's only one last step he has to do. Just one little baby step more, and he's there. Just go for it. Just go for it. Just go for it.
on student...
The Germans should not have gotten legal pot before us, okay? The Germans shouldn't have gotten that. That's embarrassing.
Loan debt, I don't think he cared about student loan debt at all, and yet he's done more student loan debt forgiveness than any other president. So I do think that he actually listens to people around him.
Yeah, and when look at the state of the economy. You mentioned the CHIPS Act and all of that. That does not, Cenk, that has no bearing on anything?
Those are two different things. And so it's really important to clarify, Don, as you pointed out accurately earlier. So, for example, you're right. I don't want anybody thinking that I think that Joe Biden is personally corrupt like Donald Trump is. I think all the Hunter Biden hearings are nonsense, and they've never had any evidence about that. But systemically, he's among the top three most corrupt politicians we've ever had. Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden, because they've taken the most amount of money. And you could put Trump and Hillary Clinton in there as well and get a top five, okay? So now when you talk about pushing Joe Biden, look, some of it is...
But okay, if we agree that they're all engaged in the same type of behavior to varying levels but very similar-ish degrees, it's just different, like which groups they're taking money from, then it's going to become a question of not, okay, who is bucking the system on this, because none of them are. It's going to be who can implement the best policies, who will have the least destructive impact on the country, who could benefit the country more, who's better for sustaining and making the republic survive, like who's better for the country. And if you sit down Donald Trump and Joe Biden in front of Cenk Uygur, he cannot argue, because he's already said he won't vote for Donald Trump, that Joe Biden is as bad or worse than Donald Trump. And if we acknowledge that RFK doesn't have a chance, which Cenk can't at the moment, because I think if he did, then his whole thing would fall apart, because then it would feel like he's just basically calling for a protest vote for a protest vote's sake, then this leaves you with two paths, and you either have the path that is, you know, rocky, you don't like, it stubs your feet, it's fine, I don't like it, and the other path full of bear traps, right? I'm choosing the rocky path.
Is real, but way too little, like rescheduling. Just make marijuana legal nationally. What's wrong with you? You're losing younger voters.
True.
It's such an easy layup. 70% of the country agrees.
True.
On some of it, though, it's not just weak. It's actually a trick, like the drug prices. You telling me I'm supposed to give him credit for negotiating drug prices on 1 to 10 drugs out of tens of thousands of drugs? No, that's a way of distracting you and pretending that he did something while he actually protects 99% of the drug companies and their drugs and who are giant donors of his.
But I think what David was responding to is that he can't be moved, but he seems to be moving on those issues. And sometimes and those issues are incremental.
No, he's not moving on the drug issue. That whole thing is a scam to protect drug companies. So you don't say out of tens of thousands of drugs you're going to negotiate price on one. That means you're not doing it. In fact, you've got a cover story. On some things, he has moved a little bit. Student debt's a great example that David puts forward. So these are facts, guys. And on student debt, he's relieved about 10% of the student debt, which is such a classic Obama-Biden corporate Democrat move. 10% is definitely better than 0%. So if I had to vote today, I'm going to vote for 10% rather than 0%.
Okay. All right, Cenk. Go ahead. I know you want to get in. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like, I mean, you know how the government works. Like, when are we going to get sweeping? Like, well, who's gonna sweep in and get and pass Medicare for all and the Green New Deal tomorrow? We have a 51-49 Senate with Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. And yet we've gotten a lot of these things done, things that will have material impacts.
Sorry, the Russians got me. I'm back. Where was I? I forgot what he was saying. We'll just get back into it.
On people's lives, reasons for people to be able to afford medication that they wouldn't have been able to afford yesterday. Is it everything? Of course not. Is it enough? Of course not. Is it going to take more time? Of course it is. But to downplay the accomplishments that they've made just because it's not everything seems so it just seems so kind of diluted, and you know how the government works. You know,
and
we're
I think
not
in this environment, when you consider who's in the Congress, when you look at the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the
what I was gonna say is Joe Manchin's not gonna be in the Senate much longer because he's being ran against by somebody more popular. He's not gonna be able to hold it anymore. Once we lose that vote, if we have a 50-50 Senate, you're going to find out very quickly that actually we kind of miss Joe Manchin a little bit. I don't like Joe Manchin. I don't like him at all. But having that extra vote, even if we had to wiggle him a lot to get him on a few issues, was adding more flexibility to the administration. And once we lose that, that will be an issue.
Matt Gaetz's of the world and what's happening with the House Speaker to get done what Joe Biden has gotten done is not, I think it's nothing short of a miracle that he has gotten accomplished what he's gotten accomplished.
You have a great opportunity with your platform. I mean, to reach so many people, to be able to use that platform to continue to push him to the left, as we all should. We should push from 10 to 20. We should push for more student loan debt cancellation. But to claim that it doesn't count because it wasn't everything, it seems just Brian, not the right way to go about doing this. Use your platform to keep pushing left.
Again, let's be super clear. I never said nothing, and I clarified this. I'll clarify it now. I clarify it on the show all the time. So, for example, one of the best things that Joe Biden did was he put in a 15% minimum corporate tax. That's a great policy, and I love that policy. And I'm fair and honest about all of these things. So 10%, like I said, on student debt relief is a lot better than what Trump did or would ever do. He goes backwards on all of these issues. So I know that, and I clarify that to the audience all the time. But don't come and tell me that 10% is good enough. Give me a pat on the head and move on. No, I'm not giving him a...
That's not what he's saying. He didn't say that. He didn't say give you a pat on the head. He said you should continue to push him along.
Yeah, no, but guys, how's that working out for us? One drugs? So at this rate, we're going to take, 10,000 years or 200,000 years to negotiate drug prices on all drugs. I'm tired. No, this is really important. I'm tired of a Democratic leader that we have to beg to do Democratic things. We constantly are begging and pleading with Democratic leaders to do the things that they promised. How about they stop lying to us and actually goddamn do it? Here, I'll give you a great example. We're not talking about Green New Deal or Medicare for All. Brian, I know those are not realistic in this time, and I want to work towards making them realistic. But when you talk about $15 minimum wage or voting rights, those are super realistic, and they chose not to do them. Chose
one at a time.
Sorry, but the $15 minimum wage thing, they tried to get that through. It was shot down by the Senate parliamentarian. And not only was it shot down by the Senate parliamentarian, Joe Manchin didn't want it. Kirsten Sinema didn't want it. We didn't have the votes for it in the Senate, even if we could get the Senate parliamentarian to overturn it. And it's not like, okay, we could have tried to overturn the Senate parliamentarian's vote, but if we did do that, we would still have to get the extra Senate votes and then bust up the filibuster to do it. If we didn't avoid the Senate parliamentarian, because the Senate parliamentarian, we wanted to do it through budget reconciliation, and they said, no, you'd have to pass it as a normal law. You couldn't do $15 minimum wage through budget reconciliation. So we would either have to convince Joe Manchin and convince Kirsten Sinema, get their votes after overturning the Senate parliamentarian, or somehow convince a bunch of Republicans to sign on and just pass it as a standalone 60-vote bill. neither of which was accomplished. The way he sells it sounds like it's a press a button and then you got it situation, which I don't think that's the case. There's no way you're going to get the senator from West Virginia to endorse a $15 minimum wage in West Virginia, especially if his name is Joe Manchin. And he knows that there's no one else that's going to take his job because there's no other Democrat in the state that can win that seat. There's no Paula Jean Swearengin wasn't going to do it. Richard Ojeda wasn't going to do it, even though I think Richard Ojeda probably be more electable than Paula Jean Swearengin was. Like, it's just the case. I don't wish it was the case. I don't wish that was the reality, but that was the reality of the situation around $15 minminimum wage.
One at a time,
You
please.
know why those didn't pass. You know that
ahead,
Kirsten Sinema curtsied and voted it down. I mean, what are you supposed to do other than short of taking Kirsten Sinema out there and turning her thumbs down into a thumbs up?
Be strong.
These people are advocating for certain things. We have immovable Democrats, corporate Democrats, that those should be the targets of your ire.
They are.
Because it's the Kirsten Sinemas and the Joe Manchins. And by the way, these systemic blocks against having any type of like reasonable democratic governance or representation in the Senate, in the House.
The goal would have to be to make opposing a $15 minimum wage in his state impossible, making it so you built a grassroots movement in West Virginia against Joe Manchin, that somebody could replace him as a Democratic senator there. But it's just, given the politics of West Virginia, I'm just saying you're going to have a rough time doing that. That's something that's going to take like a decade of work, not a few months.
We need to pass a Voting Rights Act so that we're not completely gerrymandered out of power. That's where the issue lies. But we can't do any of that. Not like giving Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who are very clearly and plainly the cause of these problems, a pass, and just saying that, oh, it's all of the Democrats, actually redounds to their benefit.
Can you imagine if they were the majority? Can you imagine if you had a Republican in the White House? No, not a Republican, I should say. Can you imagine if you had a Donald Trump in the White House and you have the members of Congress and some of the members of the Senate now? Go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to make a point about the drug stuff. I don't think it's good to oversell or undersell this stuff. And while Cenk is clearly right that there are 10,000 drugs out there, the reason that those 10 drugs were selected was on the basis of how many people use them. And so, yes, many of those drugs have a few hundred or a few thousand people that use them. Remember the whole Martin Shkreli thing. Not defending Martin Shkreli, but that the drugs that were in question there are used by very few people. So the selection of the 10 drugs is both a starting point and it's strategic because of the number of people using them. And to say it's 10 out of 10,000 kind of misses the significance of it, in my view.
Yeah. Here's how I feel about this. And I think it's very simple, and I'm sure you've thought about it before. I look at politicians and politics as public transportation. They're never going to get you, they're never going to take you to your house like a chauffeur, right? Or you drive your car in your garage. They're going to take you to the bus stop or the train stop that is nearest to your home. And that's what I'm voting on. Someone who is the closest, who gets me the closest to the policies that I find important. And in this particular era right now, that is the Biden administration. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Democrat. I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent. But the only side now that's looking out for
Is he not a Democrat? Is Don Lemon an independent? Okay, I didn't know that.
democracy happens to be Democrats, and the one who's in the White House and the one who has the best chance of winning again is Joe Biden, whether we like it or not, and it's not perfect. And that brings me to the next thing, because currently, Brian, the polling is a dead heat. There was one outlier today. Did you see the Reuters Ipsos poll that came out just a short time ago?
Did it have Biden leading by a couple points?
Biden 41, Trump 37. So on the average of polling, there's a +1. He is a +1 over Trump. That's a pretty big turnaround from just a few weeks ago. How do you think he was able to stop the bleeding?
I think it was a combination of a few things. And by the way, I would caveat this by saying, like, I don't really put a ton of stock in these polls anyway. So this is us having a conversation based on something that.
God, like, on one hand, it is true that you can, like, the polls are not sacrosanct. Like, they're Abraham gave him the 10 commandments by God. Here is the correct polling numbers. That's not happening. But we shouldn't disregard these polling numbers. They're one way to look at the political atmosphere, one indicator. You also need to look at voter registration, because the way that these different polls weight the different numbers, it's different. A lot of them have different methodologies, but it's one indicator that you should look at. You should not disregard these polls just because Nate Silver has, did a oopsie after oopsie, and we're just going to now disregard polls because all polls are stupid and the polls are not always right. We shouldn't do that. It's like a weather report. Like a weather report might be wrong. 65% chance of rain. Oh, okay, it didn't rain. That doesn't mean now you ignore the weather report. That means it's just one indicator. Like, oh, okay, the weather report says this. It's likely that it'll rain tomorrow. Plus, polls are always a snapshot in time anyway.
Agree with the premise of, but I think a couple of things are helping. One, the economy is doing well. It has been doing well for a long time. The macroeconomic factors of the economy are doing well, and those are lagging indicators. So we'll start to feel those now.
That's true, because also Gas Buddy predicted at the start of the year that prices would continue to go down until nationally in December it'd be $2.99 on average across the nation, and that was with the conflict in the Red Sea taken into consideration by Gas Buddy. Those prices will probably continue to go down, and as those prices continue to go down, that will have a positive impact. That's one indicator. There's some other indicators as well, like unemployment continues to stay low. Real wage growth is increasing at a semi-steady pace. These are things that over time, hopefully people will feel more of. But I mean, whether or not people attribute that to Biden and his administration, that has yet to be seen. But the polling data could indicate that. But again, snapshot in time. It could be other things as well.
I could have a record high.
By the way, can I just throw out there, if I'm wearing suits, if I have a show where I wear, please burn down my studio. Not for anybody else. This is not an insult towards anyone else. But if I start wearing suits, you have permission to burn down my studio. Okay, I don't want to wear suits ever. I will have lost this connection if I'm just wearing suits on my show. Okay. Or that will mean that I've sold out and went with the big time. And if you try to burn down that studio, the security will stop you, and then you can't even film. I promise anyway. I just don't want to wear suits on stream. I couldn't imagine it.
Stock market, the fact that we have 26 straight months of sub 4% unemployment, the fact that we have 15 plus million jobs that have been added, those are going to start to bear themselves out in the coming months. Even though they've been around for a minute, it's going to take a little bit for people to actually feel it. Of course, there's still a ton of work to be done. Then there's also the fact that, of course, the abortion stuff, and now, almost on a weekly basis, we're having updates on the whole question of abortion. We just had Florida Supreme Court rule that Ron DeSantis' 6-week abortion could take effect within the last 24 hours. We had Arizona's Supreme Court also ruled that their 1864 abortion ban can take into effect. People are seeing that. That's an issue that absolutely energizes the entire population, left to right, and so that's having an impact. And then there's the fact that Republicans keep setting the bar all the way in the basement for Joe Biden. And so, for example, I feel like the switch kind of got flipped after the State of the Union. Republicans keep setting the stage where, all Joe Biden has to do is basically show up and say his name, and he's going to exceed expectations. Like, Republicans keep setting expectations all the way on the floor, and so when Biden shows up and he's able to do a good job like he did at the State of the Union, and even kind of go back and forth with some Republicans who are trying to heckle him, it only makes him look better because now everybody's expectations have been set to nothing.
I'm interested to hear what Cenk has to say about this one.
Yeah, no, on this one I totally agree. And so,
you do? Wow. We have a consensus here.
So,
by the way, I should just note I have a ton of respect and admiration for Cenk. So nothing is personal.
Of course not. Of course not.
I've known Cenk for a long time. He has been nothing but kind to me, and so I just want to put that out there. I'm glad that we're able to have a dialogue, and him and I agree and disagree on certain things.
That's how it's supposed to be. That's how that's what a democracy is built on, right? Differing opinions and ideas and views. Well, Cenk, let me ask you this then, because there's been some serious demographic shifts in the polling when you look at what's for this election. NPR came out with an analysis of their polling from 2020 compared to their most recent poll. Biden is gaining ground with college-educated white people and people over 45, but there is an issue. Right? There's an issue when it comes to younger people. He is losing major ground with young people and non-white voters. Why the shift?
Yeah, I'm going to explain that in a second, but I got to tell you that I think this polling is surprisingly great news for Joe Biden. And I'll tell you why. Because I have been seeing him losing younger voters in drip, drip, drip for the last year or so. And especially with Gaza, I've never seen someone lose voters that quickly and that massively. And so he went from plus 26 to now down to on young voters, and he's losing minority voters in a big way, and that was already clear. That's why I ran against him, because I thought he had almost no chance of winning. So where's the good news? Well, now in the polling, you're seeing why the election is still close. When if a Democrat is losing young voters and now is almost tied with Latinos or losing Latinos, he should have absolutely no chance of winning. But what's happened is, number one, college-educated voters are now going in droves to the Democrats and Biden. So there's been a massive shift there. They were already on the Democratic side, but they're much more so now. So from a small margin of victory there, he's gone to a very large margin. And older voters have done something stunning. Older voters are the ones that are the hardest to turn. Their ideas are usually set, their parties are usually set, and it's nearly impossible to move them. But they have moved in very large numbers towards Biden and the Democrats.
That is true.
Thereby erasing the advantage that Trump has with younger voters, which is a sentence that should never be spoken, but here we are. And so all of a sudden,
Let me be clear, Trump doesn't have an advantage with younger voters. It's just that Biden does not have the advantage that he should have with younger voters as a Democratic candidate.
Older voters vote more than younger voters do. So Biden is back in a ball game in a way that I have to be honest, I didn't expect.
So a couple things on this, Don, if I can, real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of these numbers don't really pass the sniff test unless you believe that we're seeing the greatest
was my
racial.
question to you,
Unless
David.
you believe
I
we're
was gonna
seeing a
ask if you
racial
believe that.
realignment like we haven't seen since. The civil rights era or the Civil War, right? So I recently interviewed Adrian Shropshire, who runs.
And also, can I just say that the Republican Party, RNC, in an effort to stop hemorrhaging money, have cut out their community outreach programs into Latino and Black communities that were actually having real successes. And that's something that is sounding alarm bells in a lot of Republican circles, because they felt like some of the more positive polling numbers could have been in part due to efforts like that. And they feel like instead of trying to build on the momentum that they could get, as the Democrats don't have as tight of a grip on these voters, not saying that all these polling numbers are right. I somewhat agree with David here, not completely, but somewhat agree with David here. They decided to make cuts because they had to make cuts somewhere, and they chose the community outreach programs. And 1/3 of their staff. Yes, 1/3.
Black PAC. They have done a bunch of their own polls. They are not able to replicate any of these racial realignment findings. So number one, I would be a little bit skeptical of the degree to which this is being claimed. The other element to this is just like a technical element, and not to get too in the weeds, but we all are familiar with the margin of error on the polls at the top line. It's often 3 or 4 points. Because of how these crosstabs are created, which are, what if we look at men and women? What if we look at men and women broken down by race and then by education? Every time you add another layer, the margin of error goes up. The math is sort of beyond me, but I've spoken to some stats people who attempted to explain it to me. And so I also think that the effect is, number one, not nearly as large as some are claiming, and significantly subject to a growing margin of error the more we want to slice and dice it. I'd be shocked if these are the numbers we get in November.
Well, my question to you is going to be, do you believe those numbers, or if you believe those numbers, David, and you answered that, but if you believe those numbers, why do you think Trump has been able to make such major gains with non-white voters, at least according to the polling? If you believe
I believe the numbers, so I can take this.
Can you let David?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff. No, listen, it would be mere speculation. I'm actually not sure. I think first we have to disaggregate how much of this is erroneous or not completely precise polling data, but I want to hear from Cenk on this.
Yeah. So guys, I don't think that it's that Trump is gaining younger voters or minority voters. I think that Biden and the Democratic Party is losing them. And my theory on why that's happening is because of the TV online divide. Generally speaking, older voters watch television. And if you do that, you're going to get, in my opinion, a corporate message. And a corporate message is status quo is wonderful and terrific. And that might be why Biden is gaining with older voters, because Biden.
Whereas if you're young, you get TikTok news updates about how Biden's controlled by the Jews, and you don't like the guy. I mean, not to be, look, I'm an alternative media platform. I can't be angry at alternative media. I'm just, but no, yeah, the internet does have a problem with disinformation. But I do think there is a media consumption divide.
Is very much a status quo candidate. But for younger voters, they're getting their information online. And in online, you see the reality. You don't get it glossed over by television. You don't get Morning Joe's filter.
Let me be clear. online, you don't just see the reality. A lot of times what you see on the internet is not the reality. A great example of this would be the amount of people who are reposting footage from Syria pretending it was footage from Gaza, and many of it being people who are just straight up Assadists who are apologizing for the killing of those kids in Syria, but now that it's geopolitically different, they can use those bodies, pretend it's somebody else's bodies, and use it for their political point, and, in my opinion, to make ad revenue on Twitter, okay? But there is a case to be made about the internet being able to give you more unfiltered takes. Like my hour-long interview with a right sector soldier, they're not airing that on CNN. Never.
Filter on it. Morning Joe's filter on it tells you that, well, Israel's 50-50. Mainly, no, it's not even 50-50. Israel is like 90% right, blah, blah, blah. But online, you don't see that at all. You see dead babies. You see people being picked out of the rubble. So young people have no interest in Biden's position on Gaza. And you see in the polling, that is the number one issue that has moved younger voters. For minority voters, it's a little bit different. But what's wearing thin is the Democrats constantly saying, you have to vote for us. We're entitled to your vote, and if you don't vote for us, you're a bad person. That is terrible political strategy, and I think
Cenk, Republicans say that as well.
Younger minorities are getting tired of it.
Republicans say the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump has said the same thing to Jewish people.
No, yeah, that's right.
He did. No, he was literally, if you don't vote for me, you don't really love Judaism. You're like a fake Jew. Real Jews support Trump.
Remember, I'm not a binary guy. I think Trump saying that to Jewish voters is outrageous and ridiculous. So that to me, it's not an either or. I think they're both doing it.
Also, under that standard, the majority of American Jews would not be Jews.
Trump did it with Jewish voters, and then Biden did it with black voters. If you don't vote for me, you're not black. Are you kidding me? What kind of a obnoxious, entitled message is that?
It's true.
I have to ask him. Okay, I want to move on now. I want to talk about this. This is, for me, this is a big issue for me, and I think it's going to be for all of you, because I believe that if this happens, it's going to be the end of democracy. And this is that Project 2025. I'm sure all of you know about it. What happens if Trump does win? This is a proposed policy platform for a second Trump White House. Some really scary stuff in there. Abolishing the FBI, abolishing the Department of Homeland Security, abolishing pornography, banning abortion pills. I want to know, Brian, what you think of these policy proposals.
I would love, honestly, and I'm saying this as somebody who doesn't want to ban the XXX videos, okay? But God, wouldn't it be fun to watch them try to ban porn? Wouldn't it be fun to watch the government try to shut porn down in the United States? Oh my God, it would be fun to watch them fail and fail and fail and fail again, trying to bring Indonesian porn censorship to the United States. My God, it would be funny. I'd have a blast watching it, honestly.
More so than that, if
he'd lose the 4chan vote.
That is really the end of democracy, no?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's really no way to sugarcoat this. Everything that Trump is kind of saying that he wants to do is nothing more than this, like, Christo-fascist fever dream, right? Nothing, it's all...
Okay, if Cenk is nodding his head and acknowledging this, or he believes this, okay? The whole thing about democracy, and the thing that's really, a benefit of democracy is if you lose, there's always next time, right? Like when the Taiwanese... first had their first elections, it was actually the ruling nationalists that went out of their way to have an election because there was a uproar of support for democracy, and they thought, well, if we are the ones that introduce it, maybe we'll win. And then they did win the elections. But then when they lost, instead of trying to do a military coup, which many people were scared of they might do, they decided to say, oh, maybe next time. But if that maybe next time doesn't exist, then you're stuck. And then all the policies that Cenk Uygur wants to do are not even an option. How does he balance that? How does he reconcile that?
Just straight autocracy, authoritarianism, and he's promising it. And you know what? The fact is, the sad part about it is, a number of people in the Republican base want it, and they've polled them on that exact question. And they asked them, do you want Donald Trump to be able to terminate the Constitution? Do you want him to not have to run again for re-election and just become a dictator? And they've all said yes, or a good number of them have said yes.
They've all said yes.
So yeah, I mean, they're not
yes.
hiding this. They're not couching it in certain language. They're coming right out and saying exactly what they're going to do. And I think that, we have to be, I think they're relying too on the fact that so much of so much of it's the Steve Bannon approach of just flooding the zone with shit, right? And just hoping that we don't recognize it. And so I would just say for us, the pro-democracy forces that span the entire political spectrum from left to right, to not get lost and try to chase each thing and just kind of what is it that Mehdi Hasan says about Gish Gallop, and just to focus on our winning messages. And I think that's going to be focusing on abortion, and that's going to be the most effective message moving forward.
Gish Gallop is a David Pakman saying as well. But I do have to say, having covered every single word and every single minute of the previous Trump administration when he was in office, he does what he says he's going to do, David. And
He at least
That's not true. He fulfilled if you look at the list of promises that he's fulfilled, a lot of them went unfulfilled. They're going to build the wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. Didn't happen. Going to get rid of all of the national debt. Didn't happen. He recorded the largest deficit in American history. There's a lot of promises he makes that he doesn't fulfill. Actually, the majority of the promises he makes, he doesn't fulfill.
tries.
Proposing Project 2025.
I mean,
he's
listen,
gonna try to do it.
I try not to be hyperbolic with my audience and say, listen, there's no question that Trump wants to do these things to the extent that he understands them, to the extent that someone told him, the Heritage Foundation or whoever said, hey, here's something you should do. I believe he's going to try. I am cautiously optimistic that he would not succeed at doing all of these things. One of the scariest parts of Project 2025 is he wants to replace career bureaucrats, people who work at the lower levels in so many federal government departments who are privately, they vote, I'm sure, but they are overtly non-political in their role. They're not replaced with every new administration. He wants to take tens of thousands of those folks and replace them with complete and total loyalists who also happen to be incompetent in many ways. That's extraordinarily scary. I'm cautiously optimistic he would not actually succeed at that. And so when my audience calls and says, do I think if Trump wins, there will be an election in 2028? I do. I think there's going to be a lot of problems, a lot of strife, a lot of close calls, and he is going to have some successes if he wins. But I do actually think that our checks and balances this is a low bar, but are strong enough that we will have an election in 2028. Cenk, you don't think so?
Cenk,
I disagree. Sorry, if I can just jump in. I don't respectfully, David. I disagree. I host a series with Mark Elias, who's the nation's premier voting rights attorney. What Republicans are doing at a granular level is trying to disassemble the very foundation of democracy. In Arizona, there's efforts to tear up the voter manual. Like, it's basically, you would liken it to not just changing a stop sign to a street light, right? Like to a red light. It's basically taking all of the signs off of every street and expecting people to know what to do. And then when chaos would ensue, it would give them a predicate to come in and just kind of upend the entire system and do with it what they will. So there are lawsuits across the country. There's election vigilantism efforts across the country. There are, just efforts to disassemble every facet of our democracy happening in the courts right now as we speak. And if they had the presidency, and God forbid one or two houses in Congress, they would have a ton of success at being able to succeed with this kind of stuff.
And Cenk, on top of that, the Washington Post is reporting that one policy under consideration is the Insurrection Act. Trump using the Insurrection Act of 1807 to activate the military for domestic law enforcement, as well as directing the DOJ to target Trump adversaries.
Yeah, I think that I'm definitely the most alarmist out of all of us on this.
How can you be the most alarmist on Trump will kill democracy and then not vote for the only other option?
So number one, look, if somebody said to me, we're going to go for systemic change and we're going to make the executive branch a little bit stronger to make sure we could root out corruption, I would be very open to that. But this Project 2025 is nothing like that. It's the exact opposite. What it does is it doesn't dismantle the corruption, it furthers the corruption. So one of the things that it does, for example, is they want to get rid of all regulations so that oil companies can run roughshod with almost no laws to check them. What kind of populism is this? That's not populism. This is a backdoor way of actually cementing.
Well, it can be. I mean, this is the thing. A lot of populism is not just like, woohoo, they're just doing what is popular. It's not. A lot of it isn't. A lot of it is just demagoguery.
Corporate rule. So it's not an accident that the Heritage Foundation, totally powered and fueled by corporate money, is pushing this agenda. But the most dangerous parts of it are the ones that you guys have mentioned. And I'm much more alarmist than David on this for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Insurrection Act is real. They consider that many times in the first administrations, including a 3-hour conversation at the White House on whether they should roll out the tanks and do martial law after he lost the election. These are very dangerous people. And the only reason that Donald Trump didn't do that is to be fair to the rest of his staff. At that point, when he still had establishment figures in his administration, they said, we are all going to resign, together, unanimously, if you do that. He's not going to have those guys as a check this time. There's going to be no brakes in the car. So it's going to be a bunch of loons in the room, and they're not going to hesitate to do things like martial law. Guys, they already did a fake elector plot. That is a coup against America, where they knew they lost the election and they tried to overturn a legitimate election, full well knowing they lost. And part of the reason they went in that direction is because some portions of the right wing have become convinced, ironically, right before the numbers began to change, that they had lost demographically and they were never going to recover. So the right wing has never cared about democracy. What they care about is power. So if they get power through a democracy, they're fine with it. If they need to destroy democracy to get power, they're also fine with it. Not all of the right wing, but yes, the Trump portion of the right wing. Project 2025 has so many things in it, like getting rid of the FBI. That's defund the police on steroids. That's a lunatic position to get rid of the FBI and Homeland Security. So
But do you agree that do you agree that he would not actually be able to get rid of the FBI?
Yeah, he would have trouble with the FBI, David, but I think that you're overestimating the opposition he's going to get. I saw the first time around, and I thought that Trump was going to get run out of town, and I famously lost a bet with my co-host Anna Kasparian about that. And what I made the same mistake that I think you're doing right now, which is thinking that the Democrats are going to be effective in fighting back, that the establishment or the system is going to be effective in fighting back. Last time around, they were awful at fighting back, and Trump ran a steamroller over them. This time, it's going to be much worse.
Cenk and David, hang on, Brian. Cenk and David.
But the thing is, all of this argument, all of the argumentation that Cenk Uygur is putting forward right now only makes the points that Brian and David were making earlier that much stronger.
I think that I agree with Cenk on this, David. I think that maybe you're overestimating the checks and balances in the system, because last time Donald Trump was in office, they were tested and many of them failed.
Some of them did fail. I mean, listen, Cenk is doing a really good job of convincing me that it's extra dangerous to mess around with any Bobby Kennedy Jr. stuff this time around. With every word, you're convincing me it's that dangerous.
That's a good one. Go ahead.
By the way, I prefer Cornell.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think to
Why? I'm sorry. Why didn't you just say Cornel West then? Why wouldn't you just say Cornel West then? By the way, if you're if it's going on Gaza genocide, then Cornel West standing against supporting the Ukrainians against, if that's the genocide, then that would certainly also be considered a genocide. Again, there's not a consistency here. There's not a consistency here.
To Cenk's exact point, we have Democrats and Republicans playing two different games, and for a long time to right now, I mean, we have the Dick Durbins of the party who are so focused on like ceremony and decorum, and like they're just getting stabbed in the face with a machete on the other side, and that may have barely held up, thanks to, in part, even a few Republicans. Those Republicans will be gone. There won't be any Mike Pences. There won't be any, insofar as Ty Cobb was able to do anything, or some of these White House counsel. Those guys will be gone. And so what they did in 2020 was basically a stress test. They're pulling on the parts of the fence to see where the weak
limits
parts
of
are.
the system.
Okay, look at that black screen. This is a good point from Brian. I thought the best point Brian made was when the screen turned completely black. I thought that was a really impactful point to really get through the existential dread
I
of a
can
second Trump
promise
term.
you
Oh, here
that
we go.
fence is coming down in 2024 to 2028 if Donald Trump wins re-election, because the Democrats aren't going to be able to do it, and there will be zero Republicans. There won't be any Brad Raffenspergers or Mike Pences or Ty Cobbs that are going to be blocking him.
All right, I want to go. We've covered a lot of ground, but I want to do something, to some things quickly. And I know that now on streaming, I can go a lot longer, but we have gone on for a while. So if we can do these quickly, I want to talk about fundraising. Donald Trump, $50 million that we saw these big.
We already kind of talked about this earlier. Let's see what's left. Let's see what's left here. So 50 million Trump fundraising. We already talked about this earlier. Trump hush money conviction. That's the last big topic. I don't want to hear that. I want to listen to that. We can wrap this up here. I think 45 minutes of Don Lemon and the gang is more than enough. I think, if anything, this video convinced me more that Cenk was not prepared really for this conversation, or that he really hadn't thought through the RFK thing. If Gaza makes you vote for RFK, doesn't make sense you vote for somebody that was more supportive of Israel. That doesn't make sense to me. RFK is not going to be better on any issue surrounding corruption, in my view. RFK is like a liar on top of a liar. If you're somebody who cares about things like Medicare for all and good public health care, which I know is something that Cenk Uygur cares about, it's kind of hard to do Medicare for all if you can't even get the basics down of health care, like vaccines. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And then he randomly throws out here like, oh, he'd prefer Cornel West. Then why aren't you going with Cornel West? If you're already going to go for a no-name not a no-name, Kennedy's a name, but going to go with a candidate that has no chance of winning, might as well go with a candidate that has no chance of winning that's more ideologically aligned with you. I guess maybe it's because in the no chance of winning spectrum, Cornel West is even lower, because Cornel West's campaign has been a mess, with him originally announcing with the People's Party, finding out that they're just a bunch of podcasters who don't know what they're doing, so switching over to the Green Party, finding out that the Green Party, you'd actually have to run in the primary, so dropping for the Green Party and then running as an independent, and also not being as well known as Kennedy. So I guess on the spectrum of no chance in hell, Robert Kennedy is, RFK Jr. is a little bit closer, but it's still in the no chance of hell section. So, at this point, just like choose Cornel West, like write in Marianne Williamson, write in Bernie. Like, just at that point, definitely when you're in California, it doesn't matter either way. Weird, man. I just don't think Cenk's takes here past the sniff test. That's what I wanted to check this video over. And yeah, I think I'm coming out with the same conclusion I had last time I watched him try to defend these takes. I don't think he thought this through.